All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're taking a close look at the massive and honestly often totally unseen environmental footprint of the midstream oil and gas sector. We're going to unpack exactly how the industry measures, manages, and mitigates its impact on the natural world. And we'll be looking through the lens of strict corporate sustainability standards. You know, when we think of oil and gas, we usually picture those massive drilling rigs or just the gas pump at the local corner store. But the reality connecting those two endpoints is an absolute marvel of engineering. Just picture it, a vast global network of transportation that moves all our energy. We're talking maritime vehicles, sprawling pipeline networks, heavy rail trains, and endless fleets of trucks. The big takeaway here is that this massive web doesn't exist in a vacuum. It intersects directly with some of the most vulnerable and ecologically sensitive lands on Earth. But before we really get into the ecological impacts of all this movement, it's absolutely vital to understand what midstream operations actually are. Essentially, think of midstream entities as the arteries of the fossil fuel industry. They don't drill the oil, that's upstream, and they don't sell you the gasoline, that's downstream, refining and marketing. Midstream is purely about the transportation and the storage of natural gas, crude oil, and refined products, literally taking it from the wellhead all the way to distribution. So how do we actually hold these massive infrastructure projects accountable? Well, we aren't just guessing here. We're looking straight at the SASB Sustainability Accounting Standards, specifically the standard designed for the midstream sector. This framework provides the exact metrics and the rigorous guidelines that companies are required to use to track and report their physical footprint to investors and regulators. It's all about taking these abstract ecological risks and turning them into measurable, manageable data. And the source material? It absolutely does not mince words about the stakes. The physical presence of all this infrastructure presents some serious risks. We're talking about leaks, accidental discharges, and even just the sheer amount of land required for pipeline rights-of-way. These elements risk severe natural habitat loss, and they can force devastating changes in species movement. It's a pretty stark reminder of what happens when heavy industrial transport cuts right through the natural world. All right, let's move on to Section 1. Protecting habitats and species. So how do we actually quantify the risk to the planet's most treasured zones? It all starts with a map. Midstream entities have to strictly account for any land they own, lease, or operate that falls inside internationally recognized protected areas. And the standard doesn't mess around with vague definitions here. It specifies highly guarded zones like IUCN protected areas, the Ramsar wetlands, UNESCO World Heritage Sites, biosphere reserves, and Natura 2000 sites. If a pipeline runs through it or a storage tank sits on it, the company has to explicitly report that percentage of their total land area. And here's a detail I found incredibly interesting because it perfectly illustrates the strict boundaries we're talking about. You don't actually have to build your facility directly on top of an endangered species habitat to be held accountable. No, SASB defines a project as being near an endangered species habitat if it sits within a mere 5-kilometer radius of that boundary. Just 5 kilometers. This makes sure that peripheral impacts, things like noise, localized emissions, and light pollution, are fully baked in to a company's ecological risk profile. Okay, moving right along to Section 2, tracking land disturbance. When you look at the physical disruption of the Earth across a project's entire lifespan, you realize environmental management isn't just for when the pumps are actively running. A robust plan has to address every single life cycle stage of an asset. It starts on day one with land acquisition and surveying, moves through the heavy disruptive impact of development and pipeline construction, carries on through decades of active operations, and finally, and this is crucial, it has to address closure, decommissioning, and full ecological restoration. Accountability literally stretches from the first day a surveyor sets foot on the land to the day the ecosystem is returned back to nature. To actually measure this accountability throughout the life cycle, companies are judged on a really specific comparative metric. On one side, what is the cumulative total of terrestrial land they've disturbed in hectares? And on the other side, what is the exact percentage of that impacted area they've successfully restored? The standard defines restoration super carefully, too. It's the process of assisting the recovery of an ecosystem that has been degraded, damaged, or destroyed. So it gives us a direct mathematical representation of a company's environmental footprint versus their healing efforts. Which brings us to Section 3, the risk of spills. Let's shift gears to probably the most immediate, catastrophic threat from midstream operations, unintended hydrocarbon releases, or, spills. To quantify this risk, entities can't just wave their hands and say, "We had an accident." They have to report very specific, granular metrics. They track the aggregate volume of hydrocarbons that actually reach the environment. But they also put a huge spotlight on highly sensitive zones, requiring totally separate reporting for any volume released north of the Arctic Circle and any volume spilled in areas of high biodiversity. Plus, they have to report the volume they managed to recover through short-term response efforts, which basically proves their emergency preparedness. Now, what does it actually take to trigger a reportable spill? You might think it takes a massive, headline-making pipeline burst, right? Actually, no. The standard sets a surprisingly low trigger of just one single barrel, that's 159 liters, of hydrocarbons reaching the environment. This hyper-stringent tracking guarantees that even minor, chronic leaks over time are captured in the company's risk profile. Basically, there's absolutely no room to hide small but consistent ecological damage. Let's jump into Section 4, Preventing Costly Liabilities. So, we've explored the ecological stakes, the habitat loss, the land disturbance, the spills, but how does all this ecological data translate into a harsh financial reality for these operators? It's a stark comparison. On one hand, you have the ecological consequences, natural habitat loss, and major disruptions to species movement. But on the other hand, you have the direct business consequences of those failures. Failing to protect the ecosystem triggers massive project delays before you even get approval. It requires wildly expensive cleanups, and it exposes the company to severe litigation and legal damages. In the midstream sector, ecological risk literally is financial risk. On the flip side, implementing a rock-solid environmental management plan brings huge business benefits. It's not just a PR checklist, folks. It is a financial imperative. Effective management helps operators avoid regulatory red tape and those brutal project delays. It prevents costly remediation liabilities. It mitigates the risk of getting sued, and ultimately, it helps companies gain much easier access to new projects and fresh revenue sources because they've actually maintained their social and regulatory license to operate. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought to chew on. We've seen the precise metrics today, from that 5-kilometer habitat radius rule to the 1-barrel spill threshold. But as global energy demand keeps pushing this massive midstream footprint into ever more sensitive corners of the globe, we really have to ask ourselves, are these current reporting thresholds actually strict enough to safeguard our most vulnerable ecosystems? It's a super critical question when we think about the future of corporate accountability and the true, often hidden cost of our energy infrastructure. Thanks so much for diving into this with me. Keep asking questions, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.